Welcome to Battleground, your 24/7 source for the issues driving voters in all 7 of our swing states. First up, vying for Latino voters, what both candidates are doing to win over the fastest growing demographic in this election. Then, how third-party candidates are impacting this race in all 7 of our swing states, and why this matters when margins are expected to be razor thin. Plus, Republicans for Kamala Harris, how Democrats are targeting disaffected GOP voters in hopes of expanding the electoral map. I'm Cupp, and with fewer than 50 days until this election, this is Battleground.
In my lifetime, each presidential election has felt important.
But this election feels urgent.
We are fighting for democracy.
We are fighting to preserve and ensure the inalienable rights
of freedom and justice
for all that is America. Why us?
Why now?
Why you?
Why me? Because I, too, am America.
And I will not be erased.
A new Get Out the Vote PSA released today on this National Voter Registration Day, the nation's largest single-day voter registration drive. No matter where you live, visit vote.gov to find out how and where you can sign up to vote this November. And as both campaigns plan voting drive events in all of our swing states today, there is a concerted effort to reach and register Latino voters, particularly young Latinos. When you look at the growth of Latinos of voting age over the past several years, the numbers are stunning. Over 100% growth in 4 of our swing states, North Carolina, Georgia, Nevada, and Pennsylvania. If either candidate were to win all 4 of those swing states, they would become our next president. For more on the crucial Latino vote, I'm pleased to be joined once again by Christian Paz with Vox. Christian, good to see you again.
It's good to see you too.
Okay, before we get into a couple of the specific swing states that you've been reporting about, tell us what you found about Donald Trump's appeal to Latino voters, especially young voters.
For sure. Well, it's really interesting to see how the gender divide in this election is really one of the major stories of 2024. And that's true for Latinos as well, where Latino women are much more likely to be Democrats and to support a Democratic candidate. That was true for President Biden when he was the presumed nominee, and it's true for Kamala Harris as well. So there's really a concerted effort among Trump and allies to reach out to Latino men specifically and younger Latino men to try to take advantage of that divide.
Yeah.
And to use a little bit of Trump's own persona as a businessman, as an entrepreneur, to kind of make inroads into this segment of the electorate.
And are young Latino voters less likely to be affiliated with one of the 2 major parties?
Yeah, that's exactly why there is such an effort to reach specifically young Latinos, because, as you noted, there is just a huge number of young Latinos who will be voting for the first time in this election.
Right.
I think something like 1 in 5 of Latinos who will vote will be casting their vote for the first time. And the thing that's interesting there is that they're U.S. born, they're English speaking, or they're bilingual. And that means that it's both harder to reach some of those folks because they exist in digital media spaces that campaigns don't always get to. And it also means that they have different partisan loyalties and memories, unlike some of their parents perhaps, or folks who have recently immigrated who might have more of an affiliation or more of an affinity to Democrats. These folks don't have that same kind of loyalty, that same kind of a tie to that immigrant generation.
Yeah.
And so maybe are more willing to look at the other side or to be receptive to some of the messaging from these campaigns.
Okay, let's go to Pennsylvania, where I am. Tell us what you've uncovered about how both campaigns are doing to win over Latino voters here.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting to note that Pennsylvania is different in the makeup of its Latino population than the places that we usually think of. So we usually think of the Southwest, California, Texas, Arizona, Nevada, where Mexican Americans tend to be the overwhelming majority of the Latino population. In Pennsylvania, it's a little different. It's Puerto Ricans who tend to be the majority. So they're citizens already in many cases. They have a little bit more of a tie to potentially voting and more of you reach out to those folks in a different way than you reach out to children of immigrants, for example, in the Southwest. And so part of the key there is reaching communities that you don't expect will have lots of Latino voters or Latino residents. And it requires a little bit of a different approach in talking perhaps about immigration or the economy, because immigration just doesn't tend to be as big of a factor for folks who, aren't as impacted because they have Puerto Rican descent. And you also want to talk a little bit more, there are lots of places in Pennsylvania Pennsylvania that have large Latino populations who have been hit by inflation particularly more so. And you have to speak to that issue as well.
Well, and we know that there are pockets of Pennsylvania, like Reading, for example, where Hispanic voters, they're polling for Trump. He's making some inroads, right?
There's like a part outside of Philadelphia. It's almost like a Latino Rust Belt, these post-industrial places that have really been reinvigorated because of the growth of Latino communities in those places. And specifically, it's that entrepreneurial spirit, that focus on the economy, that focus on inflation that has made them more willing to look to Trump and look to Republicans. And especially, I mean, one of the big stories right after Kamala Harris took over the ticket before that was just how badly President Biden was doing among these groups of voters. Working class Hispanic and Latino voters were really, really upset about the state of the economy and pinned that blame on President Biden. Now we're seeing a little bit of a reversion back to more of a normal kind of 60-30 split among this electorate for Kamala Harris. But what's significant here is that in so much of the polling that we've been looking at and in a lot of the conversations that I've been having with people, the same thing comes up where it's really, really hard for Kamala Harris to run away from the affiliation she has with the Biden economy. And that is kind of one of the big hurdles that Democrats and Vice President Harris face. Since right now it looks like Trump is kind of hitting that sweet spot of 30 to 39% support among this part of the electorate. And traditionally, Democrats need to be performing above 63% with Latino voters nationwide and in battleground states. And even in some of like the better polls that we've seen for Vice President Harris, she's still only at about 60% or 59% support. So all the signs are kind of pointing to some sustained Republican support among this part of the electorate.
Christian Paz with Vox, thanks so much. This was great reporting.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Up next, how third-party candidates could have a big impact on the outcome of this election.
If the president election were held today, who would you vote for?
Chase Oliver.
I like Kennedy, though. Just because he's different, you know what I mean?
I'd rather see RFK in office, quite frankly, sir. I think the We the People Party is fantastic.
In many of the Republicans and the Democrats' opinions, I am the problem. I'm not. I am voting my opinion and my beliefs to support America. And the fact that they feel I'm a wasted vote, that's not my problem. That's their problem. They're trying to tell me to vote for their candidate. I'm going to vote the way I'm going to vote.
Welcome back to Battleground. Swing state voters talking about their preference for third-party candidates. And as we continue to track the impact of third-party candidates in this race, Green Party candidate Jill Stein and Libertarian Party leader Chase Oliver are on the ballot in all 7 of our swing states. Cornel West and his Justice for All party is only on the ballot in 3 of our states, but that still means he could siphon votes in Michigan, Wisconsin, and North Carolina. And even though Robert F. Kennedy Jr. dropped out of this race and endorsed Donald Trump, he's yet another potential third-party problem for the Trump and Harris campaigns. And while none of these candidates have significant numbers by themselves, consider this. In 2020, Joe Biden won 3 swing states by less than 1 point, while Donald Trump captured North Carolina by just a little more than 1 point. With margins like that, again, even a small showing by any of these third-party candidates could make a big difference. For more on all of this, I'm joined by Brittany Gibson, politics reporter for Politico. Brittany, good to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start in Georgia. Why are these third-party candidates potentially so important there?
It's exactly what you highlighted in that last graphic. The margins in battleground states are so slim, have been the last couple of election cycles, and there's no reason to believe that this November will be any different.
Yeah.
So if you are either of the major party candidates, you're really thinking, how do I capture every single person who is already motivated to go out to the polls to get them into my camp? Mm-hmm. Georgia was decided by just, famously 12,000 votes last time, and it's a similar case in the other swing states as well.
And between Jill Stein's Green Party and Oliver Chase's Libertarian Party, are these the voters that Trump and Harris are trying to reach? Are they reachable for these guys?
At least to some extent, we are seeing both major party candidates making that calculus. So Trump, for example, was a keynote speaker at the Libertarian Party convention earlier this year, made a very direct pitch to that party, asking for their votes. Jill Stein, because the Green Party and concerns about climate change are also similar concerns for Democratic Party voters, are also seen as persuadable. I think there are core members of both of those minor parties, the Greens and Libertarians, who would never vote for a Democrat or Republican, but there are others who view those parties as a protest vote and could be persuaded to come back into a major party camp.
And for the 3 swing states where Cornel West is on the ballot, what's his potential impact in Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina? How's he doing there?
So his polling is consistently very low, 1-2% at the most bullish. But again, when it comes down to margins and protest votes, he could be pretty influential. Michigan in particular, where the uncommitted vote is still organizing pretty robustly. That's the pro-Palestinian demonstrations and movement there. He has campaigned in that community before, not too recently, but during this election cycle, and fundraised there. And he's trying to make himself an option for those voters who most care about the war in Gaza.
Right.
So he could still be influential there in that way.
And to RFK Jr., Brittany, like you, we've certainly been tracking his impact on this race and whether he's on the ballot in some states and not in others. So 2-part question, is he still a factor in this election? And do you think he's helping one candidate over the other?
He's still a factor because he is still campaigning and doing public events and has very, very publicly endorsed Donald Trump. And while I think his supporters will splinter and some will, follow his lead with the endorsement and back Trump, others might not vote at all, and other variations in between, he is making a pitch to people who are following him to back Trump. His polling declined significantly in the year of his campaign, but he was still averaging just under 5% in national polls. So that's, again, with the margins, nothing to ignore.
No, and you have to remember, just for our viewers at home, it's not just one of these candidates. When you combine them all, that's a lot of potential votes that are being siphoned away. So Brittany Gibson with Politico, thanks so much for breaking that all down for us.
Thank you for having me.
For more on all of this, visit us at battlegroundnews.com or click on the QR code right here. You can sign up for our newsletter, download our interactive swing state map, and find our social media links. And if you miss an episode, no worries. We've got you covered. You can catch up on YouTube or the USA Today network or through our podcast. Up next, how the Harris campaign is making their pitch to Republican voters in our swing states. Battleground will be right back.
And as a conservative, as someone who believes in and cares about the Constitution, I have thought deeply about this. And because of the danger that Donald Trump poses, not only am I not voting for Donald Trump, but I will be voting for Kamala Harris in this election.
Welcome back to Battleground. Former GOP Congresswoman Liz Cheney talking about her support for Kamala Harris. Despite Donald Trump's takeover of the Republican Party, there are still a sizable number of Republicans who do not support the former president, and how they vote, or if they vote at all, could be a big deal in November. For more, I'm joined by Sarah Longwell, publisher of The Bulwark and host of the Focus Group podcast. Sarah, good to see you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, you've conducted many focus groups with people who are Republican, but for a variety of reasons are not drawn to Donald Trump. What stands out to you the most about what these voters are saying?
Well, look, I've been conducting the focus groups now going on almost 6 years. And so I've watched Republican voters shift in real time. I would say going back to 2020, many of them said they didn't want to vote for him because of how he mishandled the pandemic. But many more for them, it was just the chaos. It was the character issue. I think this is something you may know something about, but when we were sort of young conservatives coming up in this movement, character was such an important element of what you were supposed to think about as a Republican. And much of it was a response to Bill Clinton in the late 90s. And so I think that was the movement that I came up in. And so for Donald Trump to be lionized in this way was disorienting for a lot of traditional Republicans, a lot of Mitt Romney, John McCain supporters. And then also the fact that Donald Trump insulted many of the Republicans that, the Republicans that we'd been voting for many cycles, that were the leaders of the party. Now, the fact was, though, he had a big following among both like a new segment that was coming into the party, a lot of non-traditional Republicans, but also people who'd been lifelong Republicans who had sort of soured on what they saw as establishment politics. And so you've seen this weird split over the years now, where there is a big chunk of the Republican Party, and in fact, the majority of it now, which says that they are Trump-first Republicans. They identify more with Trump than they do with the Republican Party. But for the people who are still there for sort of the principles of the Republican Party, those people feel increasingly alienated because Donald Trump doesn't really reflect the values of limited government, free markets, and American leadership in the world, and certainly doesn't reflect character.
Right. The conservative part, the conservatism is gone for a lot of conservative voters. I'm wondering if you're hearing from any of them about Nikki Haley. Were they with Nikki Haley? And who are those voters going to now?
Yeah, the Nikki Haley voters are an interesting category because for some of them, they're sort of not all one way. Some of them go back to Trump. They go home to Trump because, look, they don't like Trump, they don't prefer Trump, but they're always going to vote Republican no matter what. Then there's another segment of the Nikki Haley voters who are some of the people who have been being politically realigned out of the Republican Party, who sort of cycle after cycle are seeing increasingly that the Republican Party no longer looks like the one they joined. And many of those people voted for Joe Biden in 2020. And so they're continuing to vote for the Democrats. Then there's sort of a middle group that I think, you know, we've long called the double haters or the double doubters, but they're basically people who are Republicans, don't want to vote for Democrats, but also really don't want to vote for Donald Trump. And so I think some of those voters are really up for grabs as we head into the election, because I think some of them could be persuaded to vote for Kamala Harris, and others of them likely are the kinds of people who will either go third party or leave it blank. I hear this from Republican voters who are fed up with Trump all the time, who still feel like they can't vote for Democrats. They'll say, look, I'll just leave it blank. And frankly, in 2020, those voters made an enormous difference because you could see down ballot, many Republicans outperformed Donald Trump because Republican voters were voting for Republicans down ballot, but they left the top of the ticket blank or they voted for Joe Biden.
So you mentioned Kamala Harris. Do you think that the Harris campaign is doing enough to try to win over those disaffected Republican voters, the Nikki Haley voters, the double haters? Does she need to do more? Can she do more?
I mean, I've actually been genuinely impressed with how often they include in her speeches. She says, I want you in this coalition. There is room for you in this coalition. She said it specifically in the debate about voters who might not agree entirely on abortion, but still believe that there should be protection for women. She says, you know, even if we have a moral difference, I still think there's room for you in this coalition. And I think that's the number one thing you have to do, right, is say, I want your support.
Right. Okay, Sarah, stay right there because I want to ask you about your piece in The Atlantic on swing state voters and the debate. Battleground will be right back. Welcome back to Battleground, here once again with longtime communications expert Sarah Longwell, host of the Focus Group podcast. Sarah, you just wrote a piece for The Atlantic entitled How Swing Voters Reacted to the Trump-Harris Debate. That's the whole ballgame here. That's what we want to know. What did you hear in researching that piece?
Yeah, so we did a focus group of what we call internally flippers. So people who voted for Donald Trump in 2016, voted for Joe Biden in 2020. And this is a group where over the last, year or so, we've been seeing a lot of backsliding from this group. Voters who had been so fed up with Trump that they voted for Biden, but they were also frustrated with Biden. But what was interesting about this group right after the debate is, number one, they thought Harris absolutely dominated the debate. They thought she crushed Donald Trump and that it wasn't even close. They were also all going to vote for Kamala Harris. And that and one of the things that was interesting to me was they all, not all of them, but a number of them sort of organically brought up that she seemed presidential. And that's notable because I think that is the bar that she needs to clear with a lot of these voters, right? Can they see her in the big chair? Can they see her doing the job? And that was the thing that a lot of these voters came away with. And more importantly, they also thought Donald Trump embarrassed himself during the debate. They didn't understand why he was talking about people eating dogs and cats. They remarked about how old he looked. And so they liked her energy. They liked, they used phrases like breath of fresh air. Because people are interested in leaving some of this, just like this chaos politics we've been in for so long now behind.
Yes. Sarah, from one Sarah Elizabeth to another Sarah Elizabeth, thanks so much. That was terrific.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That's it for now. A reminder on this National Voter Registration Day, visit vote.gov. Find out how you can register. I'm Essie Cupp. See you next time here on Battleground.